Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome. You are listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Today we're recording from the CFAES library on campus, so hopefully our sound quality will not be an issue. Andrew Kloppenstein has joined us from the Department of Food, Agricultural, and Biological Engineering. He is a research engineer working on precision ag technologies. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
So, Andrew, you've generated interest on social media about multi-hybrid planting with the Ohio State logos that you've had the last few years featuring the Block O and Brutus Buckeye. Could you explain what multi-hybrid planting is?
Yeah, so good question. We started out this project and there was a lot of interest in multi-hybrid planting, and we're looking for ways to really generate more interest, and that's why we planted those logos. But multi-hybrid planting is simply planting two different hybrids, corn hybrids or soybean varieties in different soil landscapes. So when we look across many of these different field scenes, not only here in Ohio but across the U.S., not every acre is the same. There's differences in soil type, water holding capacity, and even organic matter, and there's a lot of others, but there's a couple different vendors out there that have technology that allow us to switch these seeds literally on the fly.
So why is that valuable?
So when we look at multi-hybrid planting and we're going across the soil landscape, and let's just take for example, if we have SDS in soybeans, we might put a treatment on soybeans that allow us to essentially treat that seed before it goes into the ground. So when we're going across the ground, we put that treatment on 1 acre but not the next, so we get a return on investment. Another example would be looking at soil types in corn. We want to put a racehorse hybrid, or more in that dark fertile ground we want to put a hybrid that allows it to get 300 bushel, where in the defensive side where it's lighter or eroded hillside, we'd like to put a hybrid that would defend against those drought tolerance or later in the season struggling to get water.
Interesting. So that sounds like there's potential there, but you can't just take any planter you have out of the shed and use that to achieve these goals. So what kind of technology would we need on a planter to execute?
Yeah, so there's a couple different vendors. There's Kinsey Manufacturing that has a multi-hybrid meter, and there's also Precision Planting. They have 2 versions of it. So they have a meter called VSET Select, and it's literally 2 planter meters with electric drive, and you essentially equip your planter with all precision products. Now there's different stages. You might not start out putting VSET Select on the entire planter. You might just have electric drive, but most farmers have the ability to variable rate now, but they don't take advantage of that. So there's just sort of a word of caution before you jump in and do this. But Precision Planting also just came out with an MSET, which is a single meter option instead of having 2 meters, and that allows you sort of step up your planter. So you'll put electric drive on 1 year, then you'll put MSET, and then eventually speed tube, which allows high speed planting. But each of these different technologies, you just can't go out and expect to take a ground drive planter and plant 2 different hybrids going across the field. There's also the plumbing aspect on the planter. Most of this technology came out when, with these larger planters, we have bulk fill in the center of the planter, and you plumb the left tank goes to the left side of the planter, and the right tank goes to the right side of the planter. Well, when we start looking at trying to put multi-hybrid on there, you actually have to take the left tank and put it across the entire planter, and the right tank across the entire planter. So it's not just as simple as you're led to believe. You have to actually take and replumb the entire seed system, and then once you do this, you have to obviously check for interferences and looking to make sure that you don't have bridging effects, because that can happen when you start changing the length of hoses and what that planter was made to do, and looking at the fold points when you fold the planter up.
Well, it's a good thing we have engineers like you to help us out with that. So equipment isn't the only important part, right? There's once you have the planter, you still need to create prescriptions based on the different fields that you're going to plant into. So how are those generated, and what information do you need?
Yeah. So we have lots of different data layers, and if we all knew the solution to all the data layers, we probably wouldn't be here today. But we have hybrid prescriptions, we have population, we have fertilizer, insecticide, and then we look at all these different aspects that can go into generating that perfect prescription. Each agronomist sort of has, quote, their secret sauce to give you that prescription. And the biggest challenge with multi-hybrid is we don't know a lot about some of the characteristics of the seeding rates, and then we look at the traits of the actual hybrid or variety itself. They react differently every year based off the amount of rain we get, the weather, and if we look at this something simple in corn, the mineralization of nitrogen has a huge role in how these hybrids react in the soil landscape. So there's several different things going into prescriptions. What we've noticed the best return on investment over the last 4 years has been yield maps. Now, is the yield map perfect? No. But each growing season you add that yield map to your data layers to actually fine-tune your prescription. Now, there are some other things that can go into that. Soil testing. There's also remote sensed imagery, which we're starting to see a very strong correlation in some of the remote sensed imagery. And when we start looking at remote sensed imagery and combining that with maybe side slopes and elevation and looking at literally the slope, that can really come into effect maybe on your eroded hillsides, really nailing down where that transition zone is. It might not match your soil type, but it's going to match some of your side slope, and that has some relationships that we've seen.
So this is almost taking seed selection to a whole new level, because you can really do a lot more depending on what issues you're trying to solve in the field. I mean, you can, if we have the technology available, you can do a lot if you get into trying to manage pests and diseases and stuff like that. But it sounds like, first of all, we're trying to focus on that yield data level and working off of that.
Right. So yield data is obviously the easiest one, but what we've noticed with some of our growers, they say they have yield data, and they really don't have high quality yield data. They don't have a calibrated combine. They never go back and clean the yield map. They just have it sort of stuck in a file folder, or worse, on a flash drive that is buried in a box of flash drives. And there's just not good data management there. So really understanding the quality of the data and then understanding how to extract usable information. And that's been a real challenge with the growers, because not only are we managing obviously the yield, but when we start talking about pest year to year, I mean, soybean cyst nematode, that's one that we just don't have a good handle to predict. We have some identifiers to say this area generally on a farm, and they'll sort of, when we go to a field, they'll just sort of wave their hand, and it's that hillside that looks like it's a half mile away, when in fact they really don't even have a remote sensed image or something to really quantify that area. And if they can quantify the acres, it really goes into helping you build that prescription. If you're trying to generate a prescription just to plant a certain area with a seed treatment, goes a long way.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up data quality, because I hit on that a lot in my extension meetings. It's incredibly important, and in the past we've been able to ignore focusing on collecting high quality data because we don't really use it. And now that we're starting to incorporate this data into our decision making process, the risk of making the wrong decision is quite high, and some of these investments that we're making in both equipment and seed, you don't want to be wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk even in multi-hybrid. That's a good thing to bring up. We just can't go to the field and expect us to get the perfect return on investment the first year. Everyone expects to put all this money in their planter, and they expect to see 7, 10, 12 bushel return, or even if we look at the 3 or 4 bushel per acre return. It's really a hard thing to do, and when we have growers that have the ability to variable rate seed now, I would say about 80% of farmers, we can argue the number, have the ability to variable rate seed, and they come up to me and they ask me, well, can we put multi-hybrid on the planter? And my first question is, well, do you variable rate seed? And the answer is we have the ability to, but we've never done it. Well, that's an extreme challenge to go from varying your rate to now variable rate seeding plus changing your hybrids on the fly or your varieties. It's just a real challenge. And then we get into some of the logistics in this, and there's a lot of challenges there if the farmers aren't equipped with multiple seed tenders or split seed tenders, or used to just putting all the hybrids in the corner of the barn and last in is first out. They really don't have any plan, or the agronomist gives them the plan and they specify the hybrids for all these different fields. Then they don't follow it. I mean, their reaction is, it's May 10th. We got to get everything in the field. I don't care what hybrid or what variety goes where. I'm putting it in the ground. And that's a real detriment to the agronomist. I feel bad for them when they do all this work and then the farmer just ignores it. But
hey, in their defense, they print that number on the label very small, and once you've carried it all the way to the planter, you don't want to turn around and get another one.
Yeah. So we've gone a long way in some of our actual seed tenders to making sure we label the seed tenders, not just with the small print of the label, but we actually tape large enough letters that way you get it in, and we'll label literally on the seed tender, left side of planter, or the 1 bushel boxes, or the bulk fill system, so it gets in the right side or the left side. And we've had the first year we had a grower put the wrong hybrid in the wrong side of the tank and planted, and that can be a swing of 50 bushel.
Wow.
Which can be a real challenge. And if you want to see fathers and sons and farm hands get really, really upset in a hurry, try telling them when you run out of the one hybrid 3/4 of the way through the field because you loaded the planter wrong, now you have not enough seed and you just planted the wrong hybrid in the wrong spot. That's a real challenge. So you talk about making a mistake and looking into the future. Farmers just can't blindly accept multi-hybrid. They also have to look at the logistics and then being able to coordinate that with everybody, because you lose planter capacity when you start looking no hybrid in the field. There's no split perfect 50-50. It's never like that. So when you reduce your planter capacity, that's another thing you have to take into account, and farmers usually don't like being told they lose planter capacity.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think all of what we just talked about is key. If someone's considering this, they have to realize that there is a whole nother level of management. Making sure you're organized well in advance of the beginning of planting, taking extra steps to label things properly. That's a great idea there. Big labels and where things need to go.
Yeah, and the other thing is, when we first sat down trying to get everybody to agree on the same soil zone and the same hybrid to place in the field. So usually it's just a challenge. The seed salesman usually had to sell on the seed, and the farmer. Now you might have the father, the 2 sons, and then you have their seed salesman and their agronomist. Now they all have to agree not only on what rate to put down in the field, they have to agree on which seed to place where. And you talk about some conversations, well, no, that hill doesn't end there, that line ends over here, and no, this ends here. It can be a real challenge. And trying to remove some of the things, if you actually have actionable data, it comes back to this data, having good yield history, and if you have good remote sensed imagery, like from your past years, let's say 2012 was a good example where it was really dry, and understanding, well, hey, this is what it was like in a dry year. Once they plant, they know what they can expect. Or when it's been a really wet year, we've had some really good wet years. Water sort of trumps everything regardless of what you do. I mean, you can have the perfect plan. If you go out there and you get perfect rains through the whole growing season, there's not a whole lot of benefit of multi-hybrid. You're trying to take out that risk from planting. You're trying to make sure you maintain that yield all the way through. Well, if you have rain every year, perfect rains, makes farming easy.
So we've talked a lot about making the decision and how it could be right or could be wrong. Are there any ways in your research that you're collecting data to decide if your prescription is is the correct prescription, or if you would have been better off switching things up.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of challenges evaluating just the technology of multi-hybrid. So just the hardware side, all the manufacturer right now, the equipment is very fundamentally sound. There's very few issues, and the issues that you do have when you're in the field are very minimal, and you can actually trace them through the monitor or get out and check. But when we start looking at the prescription side and evaluating, did I get that hybrid right in zone A and zone B? In 2015, we were just doing the block approach. It wasn't replicated, it wasn't random, and there's a lot of faults behind that. And we were really challenged by a lot of agronomists, researchers, and other universities. We need to step up our game and really look at finding a way to evaluate that technology. So in 2016, we really went to an all strips. So the entire field was strips, and we had multiple populations. We varied our prescription, and we all said and done, it still comes back to action, right? So we had them all planted, and our A/B lines didn't match up on our strips. So when you have that, you have the combine harvesting one direction, and you have the strips the other. So we sort of lost a year worth of data, and that can be really difficult when you were on a yearly basis to collect data. So in 2017, we went back and we cut back on the number of actual treatments, but we had the same number of replications. So we really shoot for greater than 4 replications. Everything's random. We had one population, a sort of a average population, we'd say, for the field. And then we also had the blocks in there, because there's still a differing opinion on that. But we had the blocks and the strips, and that really allowed us to evaluate it. And in 2017, there really wasn't a whole lot to gain. And that being said, does that mean everywhere? No. Just in our area where we were evaluating it, we had very timely rains. I mean, we had 80 bushel beans and 200 plus corn. And on the ground we're on, where it's gravel, that's remarkable yields. Extremely remarkable. And then 2018, we're currently in that same, we've sort of found that ideal prescription, strips and blocks mixed.
So if a farmer is implementing this and they're using their yield data or other types of data to make this decision, do you have a recommendation on evaluating it year to year? Should they include some replicated strips in there as checks to make sure they're on the right track, and how do they fine-tune it from there?
Yeah, so I always recommend they should be testing strips somehow. Now, it's really hard for farmers to do 4 replications, random, and it makes no sense in the field. Mm-hmm. But I always recommend at least 2 or 3 strips, whether they split the planter and do that. And then they need to make sure they go across as many of the soil zones in that pass as possible. So if they have a really cut up field and they have maybe 200 foot of swath in the middle where it crosses, let's say 5 out of 6 zones or 4 out of 6 zones, they really need to go across those zones, because they need as much the range from poor to good as possible. And I really encourage farmers to do that. And if they have issues sort of laying out, well, how do I lay out my strips so I can publish it? We actually have an app, OSU Plots, that does an excellent job laying out how to randomize and then plugging in results at the end of the year to make determinations, because we're all about looking at averages and looking at the whole strip, but really we need to make sure we run some statistics and can actually say something conclusive at the end. Just not, well, the averages were 5 bushel apart, so I'm going to go off 5 bushel. Well, was that a true 5 bushel, or is that the way you set it up? Did you bias the data?
Okay. And when you're saying running across those zones, you're talking about a strip with each type of hybrid going through those zones, so you can check on each type the low or the high yielding areas.
Correct.
So just out of curiosity, when you're talking about these field trials, this isn't small equipment, and when you talk about all these replications, how big of a field are you typically running a research trial in?
Yeah, so we do everything with production size equipment. So our standard operating width is 40 feet. We have a 16 row planter for corn, and it's a splitter, so 32 or 31 rows, depending how the prescription lays out for beans. And you really have to have how you lay out the field. So we have to take into account tile, which can bias data on your strips, as well as any previous years that you may have done tillage on half the field or the other. But we have test strips in as small as a 40-acre field, and we have them in as large as a 300 or 350-acre field. So we have a huge range. Is it possible to get in smaller ones? Yes, just depends on your planter width. But then you also have to start looking at your succeeding passes. So what your sprayer is driving on, do you need to offset your sprayer 20 feet so you're not biasing your data? Things like that, successive passes. That way you don't essentially run over all the hybrid A with the sprayer, and you don't run over any of hybrid B, but you need to take that into account.
So I think what a lot of people are probably wondering at this point is what's the return on investment? Because we talked about implementing the types of equipment that you needed, and it's a lot more management. Is it going to pay off?
Right. So it's an extremely difficult question to ask, because the return on investment in Nebraska or Iowa or Illinois is a lot different than here. And what we've been working a lot with is Beck's hybrids, and they sort of have all these test sites and PFR sites across the U.S., and we also have ours here. And we've been sort of bringing our data together, and what we've sort of come up with is we have about a 6 bushel the acre return on corn. So when you have about a 6 bushel the acre, you cost about $2,000 a row. You get about 1,500 acres as your return on investment. Now, are you going to see that the first year? No. You might have some fields, we've seen some fields that are extremely high. You'll see a 12 to 14 bushel acre advantage, and sometimes you have a loss, and that's a really tough thing when you start out and you evaluate and you see a negative number, but you're learning each year. And I know farmers that are getting in that 10, 11, 12 bushel the acre gain by having multi-hybrid on corn. Now, when we look at soybeans, here in Ohio, we've had some difficulty identifying really a benefit, and we thought beans had a lot more upside. I think it's going to we'll see here in the future, but we're seeing about a 2 bushel the acre advantage, which isn't terrible, but when we're looking at a lot of averages, and it's just we're seeing a lot of swings. Some fields will have 6 bushel the acre, and some will not see any, and that's sort of been the trend. But we've had a really good weather for our beans last few years. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about advantages, I mean, beans, that would be about 2,000 acres to get a payback, but our planter, we have it set up to plant corn and soybeans, so we have it on a splitter planter, so you can actually bring those acres way down. You can pay for it a lot quicker, but it really comes back to just knowing the hybrid and variety knowledge about getting a return on investment, and we don't have that information from the seed companies, and we've really done a good job coming up with hybrids and varieties that are right in the middle. They're good at everything. If I pulled up a hybrid sheet, it would have good ratings and everything, and we know that's not true, but we don't really have true offensive and true defensive hybrids. And until we start to get back to that again, where we have a true offensive hybrid where it's just going to take off out of the gate in the black soil, I think we're leaving some yield advantage on the table. And there's also going to be some things that come here in the future with stresses and with insect pressures and disease that we're going to see a lot more benefit in multi-hybrid.
So let's get back to the logo fields. Andrew, how did you come up with the idea, and how do you choose the design and execute it every year?
Yeah, so when we first started out, everybody sort of like pretty pictures. You put something in front of them, they really don't know what they have, like a yield map back in the 90s. We put a yield map and no one knows what they're looking at. And we would put these as planted maps and everyone would look at it, oh, that looks nice, but we're not really excited about it. So in 2015, we actually decided we were going to do a logo. It was basic, it was a block O, and it really brought out a lot of the issues on planter setup, and it also demonstrated the technology, and there was a lot of PR that came with it, more than we ever thought.
Yeah.
Obviously, branding being the Ohio State University, whenever you put something out in the cornfield and you can be recognized, it brings up a lot of questions.
And it's usually pretty close to football time too, so everyone is excited about that.
Yeah, so the first year we had a Block O, and it's not as simple as you put the picture in the monitor and it spits out. We actually hand draw all these logos every year, and it's been a challenge because the software packages haven't really caught up to, you just put an image in and you can trace it. There are some challenges drawing those up. So we drew it up. We had some issues with our offset the first year. I like to say it's operator error, so essentially that was myself. I didn't have my offsets right the first year, and I took a lot of grief from the manufacturers in going to these meetings. I didn't have my planner offset right. I didn't have some overlap correct. And then in the second year we went to Brutus, and when we look at Brutus, inherently everyone's like, oh, that was just automated. Well, it's automated when we go across the field, but we had to hand draw all those lines and lay it out. And then we also laid out the variable rate seeding prescription inside that. So you hand draw it, and then you have to bring in and do some overlaying of data layers and pull out that prescription. So year 2 was very challenging, and we have to actually, when we had all the press the first year, we actually had to bring in a team of people the second year, and it was actually a request from then at the time the dean, what he wanted to see in the field. So we started to get quite a bit of press. And then the third year we went to the athletic logo, which is the Ohio State football logo, and that was released really close in conjunction with football season, and there was just a lot of press behind that. And whenever we go in and talk about these, farmers get more excited about that than putting in your actual prescription that gains you money. The athletic logo doesn't gain you money in the field. A lot of farmers would like to think that, but it doesn't. And then this year we actually have a logo that we hand drew, and it's going to be coming out here in the next week or so, maybe less. And we're really excited to bring that out. And this is actually going to be the first time. It's going to be in soybeans. So the first 3 years was all in corn. This fourth year is actually in soybeans, and we have been watching the field very closely, and we're really excited to see the logo. It's actually popped, and no one has seen it from the plane or a sky yet, but we hope to release that image shortly.
Just go ahead and tell us what it is, Andrew. We're all dying to know. This is fun.
Well, I'd love to tell you, but boy, I've been asked that question for a year. We're going to have to keep that a secret.
All right. Well, can you at least tell us where to look? So when it does come out, we'll be the first ones to see it.
Yeah, so the press release will come across the Food, Ag, and Bioengineering website. It'll also be on the college website, and it'll also be on social media. So be watching the Precision Ag Ohio State Twitter, and we will be releasing it through that as well. Be on the lookout. We're really excited to see it.
Yeah, if you don't follow the Ohio State Precision Ag team on Twitter, it is at Ohio State PA. It'll be on Facebook too, right?
Correct.
So same thing. I think is it also Ohio State PA?
I believe so, yes.
Very cool. So are there any other resources available? Where can people look if they want to find out more information about multi-hybrid planting in general?
Yes, so don't be afraid to ask any of us or email us. I know there's several of us, Dr. Shearer, Dr. John Fulton, and myself. We're more than willing to answer questions, but we also have some resources, eFields, and we hope to publish some more of those results in eFields this coming growing season, or after the growing season in 2018. Early 2019 is the release date for eFields.
Perfect, and we did a podcast a few weeks ago on eFields, so hopefully our listeners know all about that. If not, go back to that one and check it out, because it is a great resource as you start to make decisions for next year.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. I know I learned a lot.
Yeah, I did as well.
Well, no problem. A few things for the growers. I always, with this technology, want to encourage them, always dig behind the planter. Just because we have this technology, we need to make sure we do dig behind the planter, because a lot of things can be prevented, at least when corn comes up, and be surprised.
Great advice.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.